The Torre del Mangia is one of the last of the great towers that once filled the skyline of medieval Siena. Beneath it is the Palazzo Pubblico, seat of Sienese government throughout the 14th century. But just what did this huge structure symbolize? Was it a civic fortress representing control over the turbulent affairs of the city? Or was it a municipal palace whose splendor advertised the economic prosperity of Siena? Its actual title, the Palazzo Pubblico, or Public Palace, is somewhat misleading. The building wasn't all palace, and it was certainly not all open to the public. However, it quickly became such a recognizable symbol that it was used, together with the cathedral, to identify the city, as in this fresco by Sano di Pietro. Such visual symbolism made it a conscious focus of secular control. Its stone-crowned tower dominated the principal open space of the city, as well as the surrounding country, marking it out from afar. But what was the function of this public palace, with its tower, its castellated roof, and great open loggia? By the end of the 14th century, the Palazzo Pubblico was obviously recognized as the prime symbol of the Sienese state. And it's worth examining how it came to express that identity and how it functioned as the seat of civil government and the center of political control for both city and state. For example, from here, in this rooftop loggia, the 9 elected leaders could actually look out over the city of Siena and its territory, the Contado, for both of which they were responsible. Immediately below the loggia is the produce market, exactly where it was in the 14th century, literally where the city and countryside meet. But while the back of the palazzo overlooks the agricultural center and the countryside, the front addresses the city, facing onto the Campo, the public arena designed for civic display. And that, significantly, was paved in 9 segments symbolizing the members of the ruling council. For the whole of the first half of the 14th century, Siena was ruled by a council of 9 governors and defenders of the people and the state. Each group of 9 was elected and lived in some state here in the Palazzo Pubblico. And this loggia, which is a domestic element in the architecture, would have given them some recreation space, because they were forbidden to leave the palazzo for the whole of their 2-month term of office. So it was here, in this building, that they prepared legislation for the Council of the Bell. It was here that they promulgated Siena's new constitution of 1309. And it was they who, some 10 years before that, had initiated the council's order that the Palazzo Pubblico be built, as they put it, for the honor of the Sienese Comune and for the beauty of the city. Looking at the front of the building today, you can analyze the way it expresses its practical and symbolic functions. To start with, you can see that the facade is in 3 sections. The wing on the right has 3 windows, or bays, the central block has 4, and 4 more on the tower make the other wing. The whole facade is remarkable for its consistency and uniformity. Yet behind that facade, there are effectively 3 buildings. Even so, a single pattern of stone arches forms the base for all 3, concealing their different functions and expressing, if you like, a clear consensus. The doorway to the right-hand wing opens directly onto the Campo without steps or portico. It served the wing designed to house the 9 elected governors. It was here that they lived for their period of office, and this was the first section to be completed. The interior courtyard is now filled in and the ground floor altered, but the principal floor, the piano nobile, is still marked out by large trifore windows. These are designed with some degree of splendor and were used to set the pattern for palaces in the rest of the city. Each window carries the balzana, the black and white shield of Siena. At the back, The Piano Nobile has matching trifore windows overlooking the market. But here, because of the sloping site, they appear at a much higher level. The wing of the nine is on the left, and there, inside on the Piano Nobile, was the Sala dei Nove, where the nine met in council. This Chamber of the Nine is painted with frescoes on 3 walls by Ambrogio Lorenzetti that depict allegories of good and bad government and their effect on everyday life. The allegory of good government is a fascinating and detailed expression of a political ideal. The figure of Ben Comune, the good of the state, sits enthroned, dressed in the black and white livery of Siena. About his head hover personifications of 3 Christian virtues: faith, hope, and charity. Faith carries the cross of Christianity. Hope, spes in Latin, looks upward at a vision of Christ. And charity holds the flaming heart, symbol of spiritual love. Beside Ben Comune sit personifications of other virtues. In white is peace, next to fortitude and prudence. On his other side are magnanimity, temperance, and justice. While Ben Comune and his court of virtues are shown on the right of the wall, on the left is another image of justice, this time in action. Wisdom hovers over her head, holding the scales, in each of which is an angel administering justice. From each scale, a thread runs down to be gathered together and twisted in the hand of Concord, who sits below. The twisted cord is then passed along by a group of citizens, surely the merchants, bankers, and scholars of Siena, into the hand of the figure of Ben Comune. The implication is clear. Through the delivery of justice comes the good of the state. This allegory of the process of good government fills the whole end wall. At right angles to it is the corresponding image of bad government, where the central throne is occupied by the figure of a devil, labelled tyranny. His acolytes include the vices, avarice, lean and green in her greed, and pride, brilliantly robed in red. Although this fresco is badly damaged, it's still possible to make out the effects of bad government in both city and country. The details show marauding soldiers creeping across a darkened countryside. A farmstead is put to the flames. The city is shown with buildings in ruins. Only the armourer is in business. Murder and abduction are committed in the open streets. And above all, the figure of fear flies with a scroll proclaiming that wherever justice is subjected to tyranny, everyone goes in fear of death. By contrast, the wall opposite represents the fruits of good government, and presiding over that is security, with her scroll proclaiming the advantages of a world without fear. And although that security clearly requires severe penalties for wrongdoers, the message is that the benefits are obvious. Beneath her, a hawking party rides out into a prosperous countryside where farmers bring produce to market. The detail is lively, and one almost believes these could be portraits. A fortified town caps a distant hill, suggesting the extent of the peaceful state. The countryside is arranged to show the rewards of agriculture, from harvesting to threshing and finally hunting in the stubble. While half this wall is given over to the abundance of a sunlit countryside, the other half represents the results of good government in a city where the buildings jostle close together and the streets are full of prosperity and harmony. Although these images conjure up an ideal existence, they also depict normal activities of 14th century life. And that this was intended to represent Siena is clearly indicated on the city gate by the reference to Siena's legendary Roman origin, the she-wolf and twins, depicted projecting just as they do from the Palazzo Pubblico itself. In fact, the whole edifice can be seen as a built embodiment of that same concept of good government depicted in the frescoes inside. Peace and justice united with trade and economic success. This can be seen even in the massive cellars beneath the palazzo, which were actually used to store the salt exacted as a tax in kind by the state. Above them, the ground floor, once the treasury, is still used for government offices. The central hall is massively built, with vaults that support the whole structure above. It's a space of some grandeur, fitting for all the bureaucracy of what was one of the most prosperous states in Italy. Although this part still largely resembles its original layout, much of the building has in fact been altered. On the facade, for example, one major addition in the 17th century was an upper floor to each wing. If we electronically remove these, we can see what a difference they make to the original design. Without them, the building has a clear horizontal base that relates to the houses on either side, and the mass of the central tower is greatly exaggerated, increasing its fortress-like appearance. You become even more aware that the stone arcade across the base has few openings and lacks the ceremonial entrance stair that was common in town halls elsewhere. But although this building was successfully defended against the rebel Ptolemei faction in 1318, it wasn't ever in reality a fortress. The arcade openings and the windows are too spacious, and the machicolations at roof level are purely for show, not serious military defense. In other words, there's a decided ambiguity about the style of this building. A fortress exterior that's not really fortified, elements of the public loggia at ground level that are closed, not open, with splendidly palatial windows above. In the central section, on the principal floor, the piano nobile, there were the chambers used for council meetings. Naturally, these were treated to the most splendid decoration, though a number of the original paintings have been covered by later editions. However, we can still see the sort of symbolic imagery that was commissioned for the centerpiece of civil government here in the main council chamber, the Sala de Consiglio. For example, the fresco at the top of the wall relates to one of Siena's more glorious military victories. Painted by Simone Martini, it depicts a campaign by the Sienese that took place while the Palazzo Pubblico was being built, and shows the siege of Monte Massi. Simone Martini has included a detailed view of the Sienese camp, with elaborate tents, and even the vineyard that the soldiers planted during the siege. The siege works were substantial. A whole walled castle was built and equipped with catapults. The commander, Guidoriccio da Fogliano, is proudly shown mounted on a horse that's fully caparisoned in his personal livery. He was Siena's Capitano del Guerra in this campaign, and the date, 1328, is carefully recorded on the painted frame beneath. This open celebration of Siena's military and political success had already been established in an earlier fresco. But this is almost as interesting for the way it's defaced. The circular scratches probably result from the mounting on this wall of a revolving wooden map of Siena's surrounding territory made by Ambrogio Lorenzetti in 1334, which has since disappeared. The mixture of self-glorification and function is appropriate for this most public of the great meeting rooms, the Sala di Consiglio, where the government controlled the state and ensured its prosperity. But good government, as we have seen, had to be maintained by force if necessary. Law and order was largely in the hands of the podestà and was dealt with in the third part of the palazzo. For the security of the state, the podestà had to be a foreigner appointed to serve for a fixed term as captain of police and chief justice of the city. You enter this section directly into a cortile that covers the whole of the ground floor. Here, presumably, petitioners and those with legal business to transact could have waited. But, more importantly, this was also a holding area for armed retainers. As chief enforcement officer, the podestà had a bodyguard of 40 to 60 men, as well as knights, squires, notaries and judges in his entourage. For that element of government, this enclosed courtyard, as much fortress as palace, is an appropriate setting. Yet it was also a home for the podestà and his family, who lived here on the piano nobile. Once again, we see the palace-style windows that are such a feature of the main facade. In 1330, a rearward extension of the podestà's wing was built to contain a prison. This is no surprise because law enforcement was central to his role. It was reached by a wide bridge, now filled in underneath. The prison block itself has been extensively altered, but the cells were originally at first floor level, where the tall windows now are. Surprisingly, the upper floors of this massive brick structure were built as the largest meeting room of the whole palazzo, the Sala di Gran Consiglio, capable of holding 500 councillors and as many servants and secretaries. This wing was distinct from the main palazzo and connected only by the bridge. Equally important, though less noticeable, the podestà wing itself was separated from the central tower. A gap in the crenellations at the back indicates that a single bay doesn't belong to either part of the building. What we see conceals where a narrow passageway once ran between the buildings, starting here where the wooden doors now are. Inside, although this passageway is now broken up with the insertion of modern stairs, you can still see where it once ran between the market square and the Campo. So the facade unified the four separate blocks of the building in a recognized language of civic architecture. But there are two further elements: the projecting Cappella di Piazza and the Torre della Mangia. The tower had, of course, a function: to house the bell that rang daily at dawn and for curfew, and to summon the council to meetings. So a campanile was necessary, but that hardly justifies the extreme height of this tower. It rises 87 meters above the Campo and is an impressive piece of structure. Its purpose was simply to raise the stone crown high above the city. The design of this top section was entrusted to the Sienese painter Lippo Memmi, which suggests to me that the appearance was important for this symbolic structure. The building as a whole symbolized the pyramid of power in Siena, whose apex was the Council of Nine. But there's one final link to make. The Palazzo Pubblico symbolizes the wealth of Siena and the strength of her government. It owes its existence to the rule of the Nine. But does it also belong to the life of the city? I think it does, and this is shown in the sixth and final element of the building, the little chapel added at the base of the tower after 1352 in thanksgiving for relief from the Black Death that destroyed 1/3 of the population of the city. At first sight, however, it seems like a complete afterthought and results in a disastrous clash with the windows of the Piano Nobile. But in fact, the whole of the upper part is a late 15th century addition. If we electronically remove the 15th century work, the proportions and the overall effect are completely changed. We can see again how the roof could have fitted with the stone arcade on the ground floor. The chapel itself, built of stone and not brick, is richly carved and decorated with marble inlay. It offers the only really elaborate sculptural element in the whole building. The square piers were set with 12 Gothic niches that were once filled with images of the apostles by Sienese sculptors, a lucrative series of commissions after a time of great hardship. The space was enclosed by low stone screens, these on the sides being reused from the 13th century baptismal font of the cathedral. Thus, this chapel is fully open to the life of the Campo. Although physically joined to the Palazzo Pubblico, it's linked with the city by its reuse of well-known materials and its very origin as a response to communal suffering. In other words, it fulfilled another important part of the civic role of the building, that of religion. As recognized in this painting depicting San Bernardino preaching in the Campo, piety was a part of good government. So, chapel and tower, prison and palazzo, all form one great structure. And, seen as it would have looked when completed, the parts combine to express the power, the economic and political strength of a city that was well aware it deserved such honor and beauty.